often you're looking for a more elaborate solution, and often it's the removal of things and the simplification that actually really helps you. It's about that ethos, which I say we're trying to make a community, and a community is fostered by individuals giving and receiving. Keep it simple, understand the problem, and then really talk to individuals. So try and find out the spirit of what they've told you.
Welcome to the MD podcast with me, Martin Hartley, the Managing Director for Emagine. We're a professional services consultancy specializing in providing high-value, low-population SMEs to the financial services sector. The Emagine podcast will offer interesting, insightful, and frankful discussions on the biggest issues facing directors and divisional leaders. The show aims to inspire and educate future leaders by telling the career stories of those of today. I can't wait for today's episode. I'm joined by David Shaw, who is an SME in front office and e-trading and head of Emagine's development practice. David, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much for having me on, Martin. Good to be here.
Good. Right. So as the listeners know, we look at the past, the present, and the future, and then we'll end with a quickfire round, quickfire question rounds, where we'll get deep into the mind of David Shaw. So, cool. Okay. David, obviously we work together. I know you. You're head of our development practice. But for the listeners, let's go back to where it all began. Tell us a bit about where you're from, where you grew up.
Perfect. Well, thank you, Martin. So I grew up in deepest, darkest Kent, sort of down by Canterbury, for those that can see it that far on the map. Nice place to live and to grow up. And like many people, I went through schooling, kind of not really knowing what I wanted to do. I had friends and things that were passionate about particular things, but I was just a very kind of generalist person. I quite liked some theory, quite liked some practical stuff, just enjoyed life really. And so engineering seemed like the best kind of fit for me to go to university. And so I went to Cardiff University and studied civil engineering there for 4 years initially. And I think the big thing for me about engineering is it's really about problem solving, but within constraints. You never have that free reign to do whatever it is you like. And so you're always trading off sort of the holy trinity, time, cost, and quality. And those really, these lessons learned there have stayed, pretty much throughout my whole career. I spent the time then at university. I did a year in industry, which was a fascinating time. There was all kinds of people there that, really took me under their wing and showed me, what it took to become a good engineer, or really, but how to become a practitioner. One of the resident engineers, and they run some big projects, they would take me out onto site and they would just teach you, what you needed.
Cubics?
No, this was a consultancy called Gwent Consultancy.
Okay.
They were an engineering consultancy that was spun out of the local government. It was a great place to be, especially around Cardiff at that time. They were building loads of new things, the Millennium Stadium, the barrage, and as engineering students, we got taken out there, and it's a good place to be. But these engineers, they would take you out on site, and one of them refused to call me by my name for the first, until I'd earned my name. So he called me student, and he shouted student a lot. But in fairness, when he took me out to the site the first time, I got there with my boots and my hard hat and everything, and he was like, "They're going to kill you because, well, one, you're English, and two, they can tell this is new." So he kind of took me around the back. He took my boots, he smacked them against the wall, he rubbed some oil and stuff on things, kind of ripped and things, and it was that type of thing that actually you kind of needed. And you always need that kind of person, especially at the beginning, I think, to help guide you through what you need to know in life. And I don't think it's much different really. Later on, I've then went back to university, and I think the great thing about doing that year in industry was it was all about getting what the client wants. And to be honest, if the client phones up at 5 p.m. on a Friday and says, "Actually, I've changed my mind," it doesn't really matter. You're doing what the client wants. And so we were, myself and other friends and colleagues on the course, that had gone out into industry, were much more prepared for that just variability that happens within life, and particularly in engineering and later on in technology. Everything is always changing, and just because somebody said something 5 minutes ago doesn't mean to say that still holds true now. And so from engineering, I did a PhD in artificial intelligence because the engineering department and the computer science departments were next to each other at Cardiff. And it was just looking at how do you do that first step of engineering buildings? As I mentioned at the beginning, the great thing about engineering is you're always trading off constraints. And so the idea was, if a client came to you and they said, I've bought this bit of land, I want to put some buildings on it, what should they do? And the first bit is always this thing called conceptual design. And you're trading off things such as, what they want to do is they want to put the maximum amount of space on there, but do they want to have many floors? Do I have many floors? Do they want to have natural light, artificial ventilation? And that changes the shape of the building, where you put your columns, what type of building you would have. Also, so that type of thing. And then so it was a computer program that ran a genetic algorithm over the top of it, or genetic programming really. And artificial intelligence of this type works, or machine learning really, by rather than having one attempt at a solution, it has a population, and it tries out things. And so it would just try positioning columns in one place, and there'll be another solution which positions them in another place. And then you have this thing called a fitness function, so it runs over the top and it tries to figure out a cost, which is better. And then it takes those forward to the next generation. It breeds them, it'll cut things out of one and put it into another, and it will just try and grow these solutions, and it will evolve over 50, 100, 200 iterations to give you some good solutions. Now, obviously, in computer it doesn't take very long at all, but that was really my first insight into sort of technology, and this is sort of, a Java-based thing. But it was a really, really useful insight into how you start to do this development. And I guess the big thing that it taught me was this PhD was slightly old school, in that the head of the research group, he sort of said, you've got 3 years, go and find a problem first. And I kept on coming back to him with these kind of sort of, I could use an algorithm to do this. And he was like, no, you've got yourself a hammer and you're finding nails to hit things. Find a problem, and then once you've got your problem, then we'll talk about how you solve it. And again, it was that you just need. It sounds really simple, and his phrase was always simple and easy, and not the same thing. That actually simple can be really hard, and I think that's one of the things that's really stayed with me. That often you're looking for you have a problem, and so you're looking for a more elaborate solution, and often it's the removal of things and the simplification that actually really helps you moving through. But anyway, I finished that bit of work, and then I've had to join the real world.
I think there's some key things to draw from what you've just said there. Thinking about obviously giving back and training the next wave of leaders and grads coming through. Obviously, a year in industry was a great decision, and obviously within that's taught you some life skills, some shortcuts, get some oil on the boots.
Yeah.
But then obviously about the problem solving and how the real world, let's call it the real world, the commercial world is very much led by a client or led by stakeholders, and it's about being flexible in one's approach to ensure that, it's a win-win and the client is ultimately happy, because that's what we're there to do, which I think you don't really learn that in the university or the textbook world, right?
And that is completely true, and it is really about how do you what is understand the problem. Once you've got a problem, you can solve it. Whereas often, especially in technology, we're very good at producing frameworks, and then we have our solution, then we go looking for the problem afterwards, and we try to retrofit them around the other way around. And this is it is a really nice sort of mindset change. And I would definitely agree that people that are starting, especially at university, if you can't do a year in industry, which I think was brilliant, is to go and try and get that kind of experience early. Try a few places, see what happens, because it definitely, each place is its own culture and its special way of working, and it's not necessarily that they're right or wrong. And I think that's the great thing about technology. There's righter and wronger, but you got to figure out what you want for you, and then you can take it forward into the next place that you work, and you can bring the bits that you like and hopefully jettison the bits you don't like.
Great. So that leads us into you know, the real world. You leave university. Tell us about the next part of your journey.
Yeah, so I did a short stint at a consultancy called Cubics, and they did OLAP cubes. So at the time it was called Hyperion S-Base. It then became bought up by Oracle, but it was all about stocks and shares, stocks and sales systems, and workforce planning, and this type of thing. And for me, it was the great insight was always, you know, so workforce planning is always about budgeting. And the first thing you ever did when you went to a client, you should say, can I have a list of all the people that work in your company and a rough hierarchy? And they would always give it to you straight away. And then you would then put up they have sort of budgets and things, which is a sign of it. And then you would go and show it to your people, and they would go, that doesn't reflect anything like what, you know, our actual organization looks like. You know, Bob doesn't work over here, he works over there. Janet, she's half day here, but, you know, does sometimes there. Blah, blah, blah. And so we'd spend an awful lot of time trying to actually find out, again, really what the problem was. And sometimes, to be frank, just solving that probably would have made their budgeting system much more accurate, because it actually reflected what they did as opposed to what people thought they did. But it was the difference again. It was suddenly from an academic environment. It's quite a different kind of, you know, you're looking for a different kind of solution. If things fail, etc., who cares? You just run it again, whatever. It's a learning experience. Once you start getting into budgeting and stuff, especially as these cubes can take a little while to run, it was important that you've got resilience going on there, that they're accurate, and you just keep on validating back to, you know, your stakeholder what you're doing, because the longer we left it before validating, always thinking we're on the right path, the more likely we were to get it horribly wrong. And it was never by intent. It was just you've misunderstood something, or there's something in the data that's actually really important that you just can't tell as the, you know, somebody from outside. You often need those people to really who understand what you're trying to do, to tell you that, and then you can work through a problem again. So again, it's that kind of collaboration that was, you know, really, really good. Being on a client site always, you know, that was sort of 9 and you know, a good time to learn across several places.
Nice. Okay. There's an early introduction to Agile for you there as well.
Well, yeah. I mean, nobody ever called it that, and I think that was the you know, we just aligned. I don't. To be one of the things I found about Agile is that if you said to somebody, "Oh, could you come to our sprint planning?" they would say, "Absolutely no way." Say, "Could you help me prioritize your tasks?" They're at it all day. You know, those kind of, you know, it's just changing those words around again. Yeah. Iteration. Nobody's interested. Can I make less mistakes for you? Everybody's on top. So it was good from that point of view. And then so I moved from there to a company called Idealing, and this was really the place where I learned potentially the most, I suppose, because it was a consultant. Well, it wasn't. It's set up to be a broker for retail clients, so the public, buying and selling stock shares, contracts of difference, spread bets. I'm sure they do options and futures. But the key thing here is it was actually set up and owned by a chap called Foster, who worked there. And so we were literally spending his money. And there was only 15-ish people within the company. There was between sort of 6, 7, and 3 technologists. Kind of, you know, we kind of oscillated through that time. There were some traders / brokers. There was a middle office and back office. So there wasn't many of us, but it was a brilliant place to be, because you had the head of technology there, Steve, for a long time. Again, he was brilliant. He had that thing of, you know, the great thing about working at Idealing was you can do what you like. The bad thing about working at Idealing is you can do what you like. And it's very quick to get yourself into a bit of a pickle. IT technology is all about, you know, choices and solutions. And you can always, if you're always finding the best solution for your particular problem, you tend to end up then with lots of solutions. And the problem then, especially when you're dealing with a small team, is that person, you know, you can quite quickly get expertise in key man risk. And then suddenly that person moves on, does something else, or more importantly, can't move on because they're stuck in somewhere. And that's a problem across the city, but it's a real problem when you've got the guy whose money you're spending creating the problem sitting just at the end of your row. And so, but it was a very agile kind of environment because that's what he wanted. You know, he wanted us to be able to connect to new exchanges, but he wanted it done correctly but quickly. You know, there wasn't, you know, most of the people we were dealing with, you know, they weren't complicated investors. I mean, obviously they're educated and relatively sophisticated for doing things by themselves, but we weren't talking about people that are doing particularly sketchy things, or you know, it was very much kind of buying and selling fairly vanilla products. So again, when you're looking at these specs, it was about making sure that we support what we need to support and not supporting everything. We did a connection to an exchange. They've changed now, but it was called Chiax at the time, and their spec came on 3 sides of A4, and then the LSE direct connection came sort of in a minivan in binders, which they kept on dropping on our desks. And you know, again, Foster was expecting the same thing from each. You know, so it was again that kind of real insight that although you could do it, again, it's simplicity. It's hard to make sure that you can just keep doing what you need to do, not what you could do.
You're in a real entrepreneurial environment there as well, right? It was fast paced. It was quick. It was fun.
It was very. I mean, later on, I moved from there to RBS, and one of the interesting things was I could literally see the office, and I could see my old desk from when I went to the new place. And we were, I was there, you know, when the big crash happened, and it was amazing to be in an environment where, you know, RBS's share price went to zero, and Gary, who was, you know, one of the head traders, he said, "Well, that's it, RBS is dead." And I remember looking across and just thinking, how can that big glass building, you know, still there? There's still people in there. How can that organization have sort of been destroyed? But it was that kind of insight into the city and that technology, as you say, entrepreneurial, making sure that you're spending the money wisely, because it literally is somebody else's money. And I think that's the bit that, you know, when I left there and I joined RBS afterwards, and ever since, the money is no longer, you're much more disconnected from it. You know, budgets, it's literally not the guy's money. And so it does change your mindset, and trying to keep that while being working in other places has been, you know, something I've tried to take with me.
Nice. So tell us about your journey into e-trading and the front office briefly next, then, because obviously that's led you to the position now as being the head of practice lead for the development practice.
Yeah, so iDealing was very much, you know, that kind of e-trading. We had a website. We were taking prices, displaying on screens. People could, you know, hit lift things. We had tickets, you know, and in the background, then we had the, you know, STP process and things, and that was for the public. And so then when I left there, I went to RBS and did that in fixed income. So they had a system called CP, centralized pricing, and it was that, but it was just that on steroids. It was I was working on the rates desk, but, you know, when I joined RBS, it was, say, just after it, you know, we were starting to downsize, but I think CP was like 120 developers just in CP. I mean, it was 18,500 in the investment bank. So going from a place which was 15 up to a place where even, you know, and also RBS obviously was global. You know, some of the system there had been around for 10-ish years. When I joined there was actually a system that it had been released before I joined, and it stayed there, and nobody touched it in the whole time I was there. And we were always going to get that one next, and it remained on that system. But, you know, RBS was the place where, you know, I had actual interaction with, you know, trading desks, as in actual groups of people, and suddenly you've got much more competition for, you know, resources and ideas. And it was I think the key thing for me there was, quite early on, I went to talk to a trader, and he gave me a really nice description of what he wanted, and he used all the keywords that I was looking for, encapsulation, blah, blah, blah. I said, "Thank you very much." Went back to my desk. I produced what he wanted, and I came back and showed him, and he was like, "What have you just done?" And it was only when talking through with him, you know, he was trying to explain to me in sort of techie English what he thought I wanted. I was hearing keywords, and suddenly my brain was going, "Yeah, I definitely know what's going on," and was kind of going off down another path. And suddenly it ended up in, you know, the wrong place. So again, it just comes back to that thing of, after that, I've always tried to sort of take it, someone explains to you, and once they go into the detail, you kind of want to step back a little bit, literally. And obviously back in the day, we used to go to offices and things, but it would be like, literally point to me on a screen, you want this number times by that number when this happened, etc. Is that, are there any other times when things can happen? And it was all about that, trying to make sure that we could, and also, you'd have a euro desk and a sterling desk and a dollar desk, and once you started to understand how each of them worked, sometimes you could go back to them and say, well, we can't get, I know what you're talking about, but actually your colleagues along the way have got something quite similar, and we can give that to you almost for free, whereas the thing you're talking about would need to, it's slightly more bespoke, blah, blah, blah. And so it really was that thing of trying to get, well, what's a vendor product? You get lots of advantages of having that out the box versus building it yourself, where you can have complete customization, etc. And so, when does it become commodity? And trying to get that trade-off, and it's never particularly easy, because, often people want what they want, and to try to convince them of something slightly different. But it is that trade-off between the time it takes to deliver and, what they really want. And I think, particularly for trading at that time, there's a lot of things to be said for just getting something quickly, see if it works. Is it what they really wanted? Because sometimes you would give something to them exactly as they wanted, and it turns out the market doesn't quite work that way. Their idea wasn't quite right. Actually, something has changed. And so that time actually wasn't well spent. Whereas sometimes if you just get them, again, come back that kind of idea of agile and iterativeness, the faster you can deliver to them, the faster they can take something and start using it. And then they can decide whether it's important to carry on with that, or do they stop and invest their money somewhere else? Because again, it comes back to, money. Developers are, and not cheap resources, and so you want them working in the right thing always at the right, the right time, the right thing. And typically, once people knew what you're working on, they left you alone to deliver it. It was all got much more tricky when they're left alone, and also that then means when you go to them, you just have the whole life story. They want something. They want some AI thing that can read all these things. Whereas if they know you're coming back in next week to talk to them, actually they can break something down quite small, because they can just work on what they have to sort of think about that long-term thing. Although they can think long-term, they can just break it down to much smaller deliverables, which again, it just helps. It's that collaboration. And if you can try and be the person that can understand what they do, and especially when they kind of understand what you do, it can make a big difference to outcomes. The other thing I found was that often the trading desk didn't know what was quick and what was difficult to deliver, and that's often just because they see a screen and they just see, they see numbers and pop-ups and stuff. And so if you can try and, if they can understand what's happening in the background, then that's the best thing that happens, because then they understand where you are, what you're doing and why you're doing it, more importantly.
Great. Okay. So then that takes us to the present. So tell us a bit about the development practice at Emagine then.
Well, the development practice at Emagine is really about trying to get lots of SMEs like myself. And the advantage of SMEs is typically they've been in and around places for many years. Myself, sort of 15 years in and around RBS, Nomura, Mizuho, and now Bank of America. And we've all got skills and experience, and it's about trying to get that group, that collective, a community is probably the best way of describing it. And so that gives two things. One is that everybody who is an SME has worked in lots of places, and so they have people that they know and understand who have been there before, done it, and so you can help, and that you can help each other out with. When you join a place, often there's everything's the same. It's just labeled differently. So if you've got someone that can help and guide you through that and get you up to speed much more fast. And also the other thing is just about lots of people have got experience across different desks, product types, institutions again. So it's about trying to share that knowledge across, and so that individuals then are upskilled. We can share that information between ourselves. Every fortnight we have a dev practice meetup where we're trying to share something. At the minute it's about KDB, so we can kind of upskill each other. But more importantly, then that means that clients can then get people that they know can do things. And I think that the great thing about working with SMEs, there have been plenty of places. It goes back to sort of what I was saying at the beginning, which is often there's no right or wrong. There's righter and wronger. But if somebody tells you what the problem is, you can either just do what they want you to do, or you can kind of explain there's kind of option A, option B, option C. Again, time, cost, quality. Where do you want to go? What do you want to see? And for some, when you're sometimes in places, you're actually just looking. This is a legacy product, so you're not really worried about the quality necessarily. It's about that time, and then you can invest the money somewhere else. And that's what the community we're trying to grow here at Emagine is doing. It's trying to get that informal network that everybody has, but try to make it a little bit more available to everybody else. And so there's a group of individuals who can then talk and explain, and sometimes they can have those conversations away from other places. They can find out what's going on in other banks. Obviously, there's no sharing of important intellectual property or anything, but there's often trends that you can start seeing coming through. Who's using what, why they're using it, and then interfacing with them. And so, the devil is often in the detail, but it is a place to go. And the dev practice that we're trying to build is really about trying to move us on. Imagine's already an excellent place to work with some excellent SMEs, but better than I that clients are looking less for individuals to come in, although they can augment that workforce. But sometimes the problems are a little bit larger than that. And also sometimes you need individuals for sort of short periods, and then you can move them around to other places. They can come into a place, they can help the team they're in, and then they can move on and do some other work. But that that knowledge is not lost. It is retained within the community, within Emagine, which again helps the client out. So ultimately, that's the thing that we're looking to do.
Absolutely, it's I think you've described it really well there, but it's that gig economy, isn't it? Ensuring that everybody has a good project to work on, and that we're obviously delivering value to the client. Tell me a bit about how it's structured and what types of individuals you have in the practice and who you're looking to attract.
Yes, we're always looking for those kind of seasoned, interesting, curious individuals. So we've got people who are working sort of front office type roles. We've got people that are server side, people that are working Java, etc. People that are working on client side, people that, so we're looking at sort of C#, Angular, React, etc. People that are working on Python, some quantity type roles. Again, people that are working on KDB that I mentioned before, databases, all the way through then, and middle and back office. So really, it's kind of anyone, but it's about that ethos, which I say we're trying to make a community, and a community is fostered by individuals giving and receiving through there. And sometimes you're putting in more than you're getting out, and other times you get out more than you put in. So it's really individuals that, and we're hoping, obviously, that as life returns a bit more to normal, that people are going into client sites more, and they introducing themselves, talking around. I think that kind of collaborative effort is much easier, slightly more interested in people. Described as IT is always a people problem, and I think that is very true more often than not. So people that can help solve that is fascinating, and that's what we're really looking for. It's good quality developers that are, every developer is opinionated, but those that can moderate it and provide it in the best way. So I think when I running teams and you have consultants, SMEs in there, you want to be able to say, well, this is our problem, and you want individuals to be able to say, well, I've seen this before, you've got solution A, solution B. Solution C is often well talked about, but actually that's not a problem here, or maybe it doesn't fit in with the current infrastructure. You're always part of a bigger thing, typically within financial institutions. So it's no good necessarily having a great solution if you don't have all the other infrastructure that goes with it. So again, this is the type of thing we're looking for: these people that can, suggest solutions and pros and cons, because there's always a reason why people do things. But it's really about that. Can you get in there, do something quickly, provide something good for our clients, good value for money, and then move on somewhere else? And I think that's the other thing, is that kind of making sure that we leave in a better place than we found, be that by making sure that things are well tested, documented, etc. Working with the teams that are around us so we can upskill or help grow talent within the places that we go to, and then do it again somewhere else. And there's always places on the curve. They're either investing, disinvesting, adding in client vendor products, adding, removing, etc. And so you want people that have done these things, and that's what Emagine has with its development practice.
Excellent. Thanks for that. It's a really good overview. I completely obviously agree with what you're saying there, and it's a pleasure obviously having you on board and the guys in the practice. The final part of the MD podcast then, David, is the quickfire round. So don't think too hard about it, don't think too long. 3 pieces of advice you would have given your younger self.
Keep it simple, understand the problem, and then really talk to individuals. Find people that are good, bad, indifferent around you. Think about what they say and try and take that on board. I think is you don't have to, just because they're really good and they're really good because they do things. You're not them. So try and find the spirit of what they've told you, and take that with you. So that would be learn from others.
Nice. Okay. And then three resources that you use for self-development. Books, podcasts, whatever.
Yeah, I think the big thing in IT and technology is that kind of open source. There's a lot of code out there, and a lot of very good code. So Steve from Idealing, his big thing was that you should go out, if you were an English major or whatever, you would go out there and you would find good books and literature, and you would read it. And I think one of the big things is that, especially for technology, is there's lots of open source, really quality open source, that show you how code is actually used. So, I mean, things like Oracle, and obviously other people do produce this as some good blogs and things. But I would suggest getting involved with some open source projects, and especially if you're looking to pick up a new skill, a new language, it can be a really good way of just seeing how things are used in practice, and it's all on GitHub, etc. So it's a free resource for you, and in return, all you need to do is put the effort into understanding, and typically these communities are very welcoming of people coming in and learning. So that's what I would suggest. I would definitely suggest code is better when you're either reading code or writing it yourself. So I would just suggest doing it. That's how you're going to get better. And then for the soft skills, there are books like the 6 Thinking Hats and all this type of stuff. But again, it's really about those you can pretty much pick up off the shelf. But from a technology perspective, I think open source projects are the way to go.
Absolutely. And last but not least, who's your role model and why?
My role model. Well, actually, definitely my grandfather. He was a GP, and I remember in a sort of old Welsh mining town, and I remember going with him as a child, and it was kind of like being with a sort of celebrity, and people talked nicely to him, etc., etc. But when he passed away, and my grandmother passed away 20 years later, I remember going to her funeral, and somebody was coming, he's standing there, and people were talking to you, and there was 3 or 4 people that came up and said, "I'm here because your grandfather was such a he helped me through such a tough time." And you think, well, he hasn't been a GP for 20-ish years. This is his wife. Yeah. So crikey, what has he done? And I think he was one of those people that did give a lot. So from that point of view, it's always something to try and aspire to achieve, to be somebody that people would think about in a good way, even after they've done things. So he'd be very much my role model.
I think that's a great one. Well done. Okay, thanks, David. It's been a pleasure. Thanks for joining me and obviously sharing your insights. If anyone's listening and wants to pick your brains, then I'm sure you're open to people reaching out to you on LinkedIn, so they can find you on there. Obviously, thanks and good luck with the dev practice. Keen to see where you take that. And obviously to our listeners, thanks for tuning in, and I hope you enjoyed listening. If you enjoyed it, please share it and pass the pod. But obviously, don't tell Crouchy's legal team I said that. Thanks a lot.